They say blood is thicker than water, but in my family, blood is merely ink for signing checks. For 10 years, I served as the financial backbone for their lavish lifestyle under the guise of filial piety. That changed 72 hours ago when a digital glitch revealed my mother laughing and calling me the world's most gullible ATM. I paid $384,000 for their disdain. And tonight, I am delivering the final receipt. My name is Colette Sinclair, and until 3 days ago, I defined my existence by a single, pathetic metric, which was how useful I could be to the two people who gave me life. I am the Chief Strategy Officer at Ether Systems, a company that builds the digital infrastructure for half the Fortune 500. I command a salary that places me in the top 1% of earners in Washington state. I live in a penthouse on the 34th floor, overlooking the steel-gray expanse of Elliott Bay, where the rain streaks the glass like tears I learned long ago not to shed. Yet, despite the corner office and the seven-figure portfolio, I was reduced to a trembling child every time my phone displayed the contact named Mom. It was a Tuesday evening, raining as it always does in Seattle during November. The city below was a blur of charcoal and neon, but my focus was entirely on the 3 monitors curving around my workspace. I was not working on company time. I was finalizing a gift. My parents' 40th wedding anniversary was approaching, and because a simple check for $10,000 felt too impersonal, and because they had hinted that their security at the Mercer Island estate felt outdated, I had built them a fortress. I had spent the last 6 months coding a custom smart home ecosystem for them. It was a proprietary system, integrated with the highest level of encryption Ether Systems could offer. It controlled everything from the climate to the perimeter sensors. I wanted them to be safe. I wanted them to feel cared for. I wanted, desperately, for my father to look at the complex dashboard I had designed and say that he was proud of my mind, not just my bank account. The installation crews had finished the physical setup earlier that afternoon. Now, sitting in the blue-lit silence of my office, I initiated a remote handshake with the server at their house to run the final diagnostics. I needed to ensure the cloud synchronization protocols were functioning before I handed over the administrative keys to them at the party on Saturday. My fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard. The code cascaded down the center screen in a waterfall of green and white. Connection established. Latency was under 12 milliseconds. The video feeds from the external cameras were crisp, showing the manicured hedges and the wet pavement of the driveway. I cycled through the interior sensors. The thermostat in the wine cellar was holding steady at 55 degrees. The motion detectors in the hallway were active. Then, I saw the anomaly. The system had a feature I called the ambient buffer. It was designed to trigger short audio-visual recordings if decibel levels spiked unexpectedly in certain zones. A safety measure for break-ins. According to the logs, the system had flagged a file from the previous evening at 8:45 in the evening. It was labeled simply by its timestamp and location, Living Room Main. However, the system's AI, which I had trained to tag context, had appended a tentative title based on the audio signature. The file was labeled Wine and Plans. My finger hovered over the delete key. My parents deserved their privacy. If they had been having an argument or an intimate moment, I had no business listening. I was raised to be the good daughter, the respectful daughter. But as I moved the cursor, the metadata panel caught my eye. The keyword tag cloud generated by the AI included 3 words: legacy, surgery, and Colette. My stomach gave a sharp, cold lurch. Surgery. My father had called me 2 days ago, his voice rasping and weak, claiming his cardiologist had found a blockage that required immediate, non-invasive intervention that insurance refused to cover fully because of a pre-existing condition clause. He needed $15,000 by Friday. I had wired the money within 10 minutes of hanging up, adding an extra $2,000 for his post-op recovery. Panic seized me. Had something gone wrong? Had the surgery been moved up? Was he collapsing in the living room while the system recorded his distress? I double-clicked the file. The audio quality was crystal clear, processed through the high-fidelity noise cancellation algorithms I had written myself. There was no static. It sounded as if I were sitting on the plush velvet sofa right next to them. The first sound was not a cry for help. It was the distinct, festive pop of a champagne cork leaving a bottle. Then came the sound of liquid pouring into crystal, followed by a satisfied sigh that I recognized instantly. It was my father. Richard. He did not sound short of breath. He did not sound like a man with a blockage in his arteries. He sounded triumphant. "To the art of the deal," Richard boomed. His voice was rich and baritone, the voice he used when he was charming investors or closing a sale, not the frail, wheezing whisper he had used on the phone with me 48 hours ago. "To the art of the daughter." My mother, Sylvia, corrected him. Her voice was light, airy, and sharp, like wind chime glass shattering on a marble floor. I froze. The ambient light from my monitors cast long, distorted shadows against the back wall of my office. I stared at the waveform on the screen, watching the peaks and valleys of their laughter. "Did the transfer clear?" Sylvia asked. I could hear the clink of her jewelry as she likely raised her glass. "Cleared this morning," Richard replied. $15,000. Easy as breathing. I told you she would panic if I mentioned the word heart. She has always been morbidly terrified of being an orphan. I felt the blood drain from my face, pooling somewhere in my feet. My hands, usually steady as a surgeon's, began to tremble. There was no surgery. There was never a surgery. 15,000, Sylvia mused, and I could hear the smile in her voice. That covers the deposit perfectly. Captain Henderson said if we didn't put the money down by Wednesday, he would sell the legacy to that developer from Vancouver. The legacy. For a moment, my brain refused to process the data. I tried to find a logical explanation. Perhaps the legacy was a medical device. Perhaps it was a specialized treatment center. But the data analyst in me, the part of my brain that dealt in cold, hard facts, forced the pieces together. Captain Henderson, a deposit. They were buying a boat. I had been driving a 6-year-old sedan because I was worried about their mortgage payments. I had skipped my own vacation to Cabo last year because they claimed the heating system in the Mercer Island house needed a $10,000 overhaul, and they were buying a boat using the money I sent to save my father's life. "It is a beautiful vessel," Richard said, the sound of him sipping his drink filling my headphones. 40 feet of Italian design. We are going to look magnificent pulling into the marina next summer. The neighbors will finally understand who they are dealing with. We deserve it. Richard, Sylvia said soothingly, God knows we have sacrificed enough. Raising 2 children? It took everything we had. Raising Julian took everything we had, Richard corrected, and his tone shifted, becoming warmer, softer. But he is worth it. Did you see him today? He looked dashing in that new suit. He has the spirit. Sylvia, he has the fire. He just needs the right opportunity to launch. He is a dreamer, Sylvia agreed lovingly. Like us, he is the child of our love, Richard, born from passion. I held my breath. I waited for them to speak of me with even a fraction of that warmth. I waited for the "but Colette is the reliable one," or "thank God for Colette." And Colette? Richard snorted. Colette is the child of our bills. The silence in my penthouse was deafening. The hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, 50 feet away, sounded like a jet engine. Don't be cruel, Richard, Sylvia giggled, though there was no admonishment in her tone. She is useful. She is functional, like a good appliance or a government bond. Boring, but reliable. She is an ATM that breathes, Richard said. A walking, talking bank balance. Do you know what she said when I told her about the surgery? She asked if she should fly down. Oh, God. No, Sylvia groaned. She is so exhausting to be around. All that staring. She looks at us like she is trying to solve an equation. It gives me a migraine. I told her no, Richard said. I told her the doctors insisted on isolation. Can you imagine her here? Hovering, asking to see the medical charts? She would ruin the whole mood. She is so desperate, Sylvia said. And then, the sound that shattered me completely. My mother cleared her throat and pitched her voice up an octave. She adopted a frantic, trembling, pathetic tone. "Oh, Mommy! Oh, Daddy! Is he okay? Do you need more money? Should I sell my stocks? Please, let me buy your love. Please, let me pay for your attention." Richard exploded into laughter. It was a deep, belly-shaking laugh that spiked the red levels on my audio visualizer. Sylvia joined him, her high-pitched cackle intertwining with his guffaws. "You sound exactly like her," Richard gasped between breaths. "The poor, pathetic thing. She really has no idea. Does she?" "None," Sylvia said, her voice returning to normal, cold and dismissive. "She thinks she is the savior of this family. Let her think it, as long as the check's clear. She can be whatever she wants. Now, pour me another glass. We need to celebrate. The legacy is finally ours." The recording ended. The waveform flattened into a straight, dead line. I sat there. I did not move. I did not blink. My reflection in the dark monitor stared back at me. I looked the same as I had 5 minutes ago. Same dark hair pulled back in a severe bun. Same sharp jawline. Same eyes. But the person behind those eyes had evaporated. I waited for the tears. I had cried so many times over them. I had cried when they missed my college graduation because Julian had a minor fender bender. I had cried when they forgot my 30th birthday because they were on a retreat in Napa. I had cried every time I felt that crushing weight of never being enough. But now? Nothing. My eyes were dry. My heart was beating at a steady 60 beats per minute. My breathing was rhythmic and calm. It was a strange sensation. Physically, it felt as if someone had reached into my chest cavity, located the heavy, throbbing knot of guilt and affection that had tethered me to them for 32 years, and simply severed it with a scalpel. There was no pain. There was only a vast, terrifying clarity. They had not just stolen $15,000. That was negligible. They had stolen my reality. They had stolen 10 years of my life, creating a fictional narrative where they were the tragic victims and I was the dutiful hero, while in reality, I was merely the punchline to their private jokes. "Child of our bills," I whispered to the empty room. I looked at the code still running on the center screen. The logic gates, the if-then statements, the loops. My life had been a loop. If I pay, then they will love me. If I solve their problems, then I will be worthy. The loop was broken. I reached out and saved the audio file. I did not save it to the cloud. I saved it to a local, encrypted drive that only I could access. Then, I opened a new command terminal. I looked at the timestamp. It was 9:15 in the evening, the gala, the Golden Horizon charity event where they were to be honored as the Giving Family of the Year, was in 3 days. I swiveled my chair toward the window. The city lights of Seattle shimmered below, cold and distant. I felt a kinship with them now. I was no longer the warm, fleshy thing that needed validation. I was something else. I was something like the code I wrote, logical, efficient, and capable of executing commands without mercy. The Colette who sent money for heart surgeries was dead. She had died the moment that champagne cork popped. The woman sitting in the chair now was the chief strategy officer of a multi-billion-dollar corporation, and she had just discovered a massive fraud in her most significant investment. I did not feel sad. I did not feel angry in the hot, chaotic way I used to. I felt a cold, metallic precision locking into place in my mind. "Okay," I said aloud. The single word hung in the air. Final and absolute. I turned back to the keyboard. I did not log out of their house server. Instead, I opened the root directory. I had administrative access. I had total control. They thought I was a walking ATM? Fine, but they forgot that an ATM is just a terminal for a banking system. And I owned the bank. I began to type, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't writing code to build something for them. I was writing a script to dismantle them. The love was gone. replaced by a balance sheet that was heavily in the red, and it was time to collect. The silence in my office was heavy, but it was not empty. It was filled with the ghosts of the last 10 years, specters of memories that I had once categorized as acts of love, now revealing themselves to be carefully orchestrated transactions. I swiveled my chair away from the glowing screens and looked out at the rain-slicked darkness of Seattle. To understand how I arrived at this moment, sitting in a multi-million-dollar penthouse yet feeling entirely destitute of human connection, I had to dissect the architecture of my own enslavement. It did not happen overnight. It was a slow, methodical constriction, like a python wrapping itself around a ribcage, tightening only when the victim exhaled. I let my mind drift back to the beginning. It was 10 years ago. I was 22 years old, fresh out of the University of Washington with a degree in computer science and a job offer from Ether Systems. Back then, Ether was just a scrappy startup operating out of a repurposed garage in Bellevue. But they saw something in my code that they liked. My starting salary was $85,000 a year. To me, having grown up watching my parents supposedly struggle to keep the lights on, that sum felt like the gross domestic product of a small nation. I felt powerful. I felt capable. And most dangerous of all, I felt indebted. My parents had planted the seeds of this debt long before I ever signed that employment contract. The narrative of the Sinclair household was always one of tragic sacrifice. Richard and Sylvia Sinclair were not just parents. In their own retelling, they were martyrs. My father would sit me down, swirling a glass of cheap brandy, or what I thought was cheap brandy, and tell me about the gallery in Paris that wanted to exhibit his paintings in 1990. He would tell me how he turned it down because my mother was pregnant with me, and they needed stability. My mother would chime in, touching her throat with a trembling hand. Recounting the ballet scholarship to Juilliard, she rejected because she could not bear to leave her family behind. I grew up believing that my very existence was the anchor that dragged their dreams to the ocean floor. I believed they had traded their brilliance for my mediocrity. It was a lie. I know now that my grandfather left them a trust fund that would have lasted 3 lifetimes if managed with an ounce of prudence. There was no gallery in Paris. There was no scholarship to Juilliard. They were simply mediocre artists with expensive tastes who had burned through their inheritance by the time I was 12. But at 22, I did not know this. I only knew that it was my turn to carry the cross. The first tug on the leash was subtle. It was November. Much like tonight, I had just received my second paycheck. My mother called me, her voice tight and small. She did not ask for money directly. That was not her style. Instead, she described the cold. She told me that the roof over the guest bedroom had sprung a leak during a storm, and the water was dripping onto the hardwood floors. She said my father was up there with a bucket and some plastic sheeting, trying to patch it in the freezing rain because they could not afford a contractor. I could see it vividly. My aging father, risking pneumonia to save our home. The guilt was instantaneous and visceral. It felt like a physical blow to the stomach. I asked how much it would cost to fix. She hesitated, playing the role of the proud mother who did not want to burden her child, before whispering that the deductible was $500. $500. I wrote the check that afternoon. I drove it to Mercer Island myself, handing it to them with a sense of profound duty. They hugged me. My mother cried. My father looked at me with what I interpreted as respect. I felt like a hero. I did not know then that $500 was the entrance fee to a game I would never win. I did not know that there was likely no leak, or if there was, a $5 tube of sealant would have fixed it. That $500 was a test. They needed to see if the mechanism worked. They needed to see if I would pay. And I did. From that moment, the requests escalated with terrifying geometric progression. The roof leak turned into a broken furnace in January. The broken furnace became a transmission failure in my father's car in March. By summer, it was property taxes. They were always crises. They were always urgent. There was never a moment to plan or discuss. It was always a frantic phone call at 10 in the morning on a Tuesday. disrupting my meetings, demanding immediate liquidity to stave off some catastrophic consequence. Then came the investments. My father, having realized he could tap into my income, suddenly remembered his entrepreneurial spirit. He had ideas. He had visions. There was a craft brewery concept that needed $10,000 for seed capital. There was a bespoke furniture import business that required $15,000 for inventory. I funded them all. I funded them because every time I hesitated, my mother would remind me of the Paris Gallery. She would remind me of the life they gave up. "We invested in you, Colette," she would say, her eyes wide and wet. "We put every penny we had into your education, your braces, your clothes, and now that Daddy has a chance to finally do something for himself, you are going to say no?" So I wrote the checks. The businesses never launched. The money vanished into a black hole, and the subject was never raised again. Replaced the following month by a new crisis or a new dream. While I was bleeding cash, there was Julian. My younger brother was the golden child, the accident that they claimed was a blessing. Unlike the obligation that was me, Julian dropped out of college 3 times. He never held a job for longer than 6 months, yet, whenever I visited the house on Mercer Island, Julian was wearing a new watch. He was driving a leased BMW. He was wearing Italian loafers that cost more than my monthly food budget. I asked about it once, 5 years ago. I pointed to a designer jacket he had casually thrown over a chair, a jacket I knew retailed for $2,000. "Oh, that?" My mother had laughed, waving her hand dismissively. "That is a knockoff, darling. Julian has a friend in Chinatown who gets them for $50. You know Julian, always looking for a bargain." Or she would say it was a gift. "His new girlfriend comes from money, Colette. She spoils him. It is embarrassing, really. But what can we do?" I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe her. The alternative, that they were funneling my hard-earned money, the money I scraped together by eating instant noodles and working 80-hour weeks, directly into Julian's pockets, was too painful to countenance. So I swallowed the lie. I convinced myself that the Rolex on his wrist was fake. Even when the sweep of the second hand was perfectly smooth, I convinced myself that his vacations to Tulum and Ibiza were funded by wealthy friends, not by the $20,000 I had transferred for emergency termite extermination. The psychological manipulation was a masterclass in gaslighting. Whenever I tried to set a boundary, my mother would deploy her health as a weapon. If I said I could not afford a transfer this month, she would suddenly develop palpitations. She would gasp for air on the phone, dropping the handset so I could hear it clatter against the table. I would panic, terrified that I was killing her with my selfishness. I would transfer the money, and miraculously, her heart would stabilize within the hour, or she would attack my character. "You have changed, Colette," she would say, her voice dripping with disappointment. "Money has made you cold. You used to be such a sweet, caring girl. Now you act like a banker. It is ugly. We raised you to value family, not your bank account." The irony was suffocating. I was valuing family. I was valuing them above everything else. For the first 7 years of my career, I was earning well into the 6 figures. Yet I lived in a 400-square-foot studio apartment in Capitol Hill, with drafty windows and a radiator that rattled like a dying engine. I drove a 10-year-old Honda Civic with a dent in the passenger door. I never took vacations. I bought my clothes at discount outlets. I hoarded every penny I kept for myself, terrified that if I spent money on a nice dinner or a weekend trip, I would not have enough when the next family emergency struck. I lived in a state of perpetual financial anxiety, despite being in the top tax bracket, solely to maintain their illusion of poverty. They ensured I had no one else to turn to. This was perhaps the most insidious part of their strategy. They systematically isolated me. When I brought home a boyfriend named David during my 3rd year at Ether, a kind man who worked in environmental law, my parents dissected him with surgical precision. At dinner, my father made subtle, belittling jokes about lawyers who hugged trees instead of making real money. My mother pulled me into the kitchen under the pretense of getting dessert and whispered that David looked at me with possessive eyes and that he clearly wanted to control my finances. "He does not understand us," she had hissed. "He does not understand the bond of the Sinclair family. He will try to drive a wedge between us. Colette, I can see it." They were relentless. Every time I had a conflict with a friend, they would encourage me to cut ties. "You do not need them," they would say. "Friends come and go. Family is forever." Eventually, David left, tired of coming second to my parents' demands. My friends stopped calling because I could never go out, always saving money for the next catastrophe. I was left alone, tethered only to the 3 people on Mercer Island who viewed me as a resource rather than a human being. I looked down at my hands, resting on the mahogany desk of my penthouse office. I realized now, with crystal clarity, that I had never truly been part of their family. I was an employee, a contractor, a utility provider. I thought about the holidays, Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter. I scanned my memory, looking for a single instance where I had been invited to dinner without a transaction preceding it. 2 years ago, Christmas Eve. I had not heard from them all of December. I assumed they were busy. Then, on the 23rd, my father called. He needed $8,000 to pay property taxes that were supposedly in arrears, or the county would place a lien on the house. I sent the money. An hour later, I received a text from my mother. "Dinner at 6 tomorrow. Bring wine." If I had not sent the check, would there have been a dinner? The realization was a physical weight in my chest. No, there would have been no dinner. I would have sat alone in my apartment, wondering what I had done wrong. While they ate roast duck bought with someone else's money, I was never the daughter. I was the sponsor. I stood up and walked to the window, pressing my forehead against the cold glass. The lights of the city blurred into streaks of gold and red. For 10 years, I had built a cage for myself out of guilt and duty. I had let them starve me of affection so they could feast on my earnings. But the recording I had just heard, the laughter, the child of our bills, it was the key to the cage. They had pushed too far. They had revealed the mechanism. I turned back to the room. The shadows seemed less menacing now. They were just shadows. The fear that had ruled my life, the fear of losing their love, was gone. Because I realized there was no love to lose. You cannot lose what never existed. I picked up my phone. I had work to do, not for Ether Systems, and certainly not for the Sinclair Family Trust. I had to audit a decade of theft. I had to peel back the layers of lies about leaking roofs and heart surgeries and failing businesses. I was going to follow the money, every single cent of the $384,520, and I was going to find out exactly where it went. The sadness evaporated, replaced by the cold, hard hum of processing power. The flashback was over. The nostalgia was dead. It was time to run the numbers. Most people, when confronted with a betrayal of this magnitude, would confront the perpetrators immediately. They would drive to the scene of the crime, scream, throw vases, and demand explanations. But I am not most people. I am a data strategist. In my world, emotion is noise, and data is signal. You do not go into a boardroom meeting to dismantle a competitor based on a hunch or a hurt feeling. You go in with a dossier. You go in with leverage. Instead of grabbing my car keys, I sat back down at my desk. The rage that had threatened to consume me only moments ago had crystallized into a cold, hard determination. I needed to conduct a forensic audit of my own life. I opened a new instance on my secure server and logged into my primary banking portal. I did not just look at the last month. I adjusted the date range parameters to cover the last 10 years. Starting from the day I received my first paycheck at Ether Systems, I downloaded every statement, every transaction history, and every transfer log in comma-separated values format. I imported the raw data into a visualization tool I used for analyzing market trends. I set up a filter to isolate every outgoing transaction to 3 specific recipients: Richard Sinclair, Sylvia Sinclair, and Julian Sinclair. The screen filled with rows, hundreds of them. I began to tag them: medical emergency, home repair, education support, legal fees, business investment. The algorithm crunched the numbers, categorizing the decade of extraction. I watched the total sum tally up in the bottom right corner of the screen. It ticked upward, digit by digit, like a fuel pump running on high. It stopped at $384,520. I stared at the number. $384,520. That was a house. That was a retirement fund. That was a life. It was more than the net worth of most families in this country. And I had handed it over, piece by piece, believing I was keeping my parents from starving, believing I was keeping a roof over their heads. But a bank statement only tells you where the money went, not what it was actually used for. For that, I needed eyes on the ground. I needed someone who could walk through walls that I could not. I opened an encrypted messaging app and scrolled down to a contact listed only as M. Marcus was a friend from my university days, a brilliant computer engineering dropout who had found the corporate structure too suffocating. He now operated as a private investigator and a white-hat hacker, specializing in asset tracing for divorce settlements and corporate fraud. He was expensive, discreet, and he owed me a favor for helping him wipe a digital footprint 3 years ago. I need a full asset search and lifestyle audit on Richard and Sylvia Sinclair. And Julian Sinclair. I typed, look for shell companies, hidden accounts, and real estate. I need it yesterday. The reply came 3 minutes later. The parents? That is cold. Colette. But I am on it. Give me 24 hours. You have 12. I replied. I did not sleep that night. I spent the hours cross-referencing the dates of my transfers with the dates of my parents' alleged crises. Every time I had sent money for a leaking roof, the weather archives showed it had been sunny in Mercer Island for a week. Every time I had sent money for heating oil, the price of oil had been at a record low. The next morning, I went to work. I sat in meetings. I nodded at projections. I drank coffee. I performed the role of the focused executive perfectly, while inside, a countdown clock was ticking. At exactly 11 in the morning, a secure file transfer notification pinged on my private tablet. It was from Marcus. The subject line read simply, Pandora's Box. I locked my office door, lowered the blinds, and opened the dossier. The first page was a summary of assets. I expected to see debt. I expected to see maxed-out credit cards and second mortgages, confirming that while they had lied to me about the emergencies, they were perhaps just terrible with money. I was wrong. According to Marcus's report, Richard and Sylvia Sinclair were not poor. They were not even struggling. They were wealthy. The report listed a limited liability company named Sinclair Holdings, registered in Delaware 5 years ago. The registered agent was a lawyer I did not know, but the beneficiaries were Richard and Sylvia. Under the umbrella of this shell company, they owned not one, but 3 residential properties in the greater Seattle area. They were rental properties. While I was paying their property taxes on the Mercer Island house because they claimed they were broke, they were collecting rent from 3 different families. The estimated monthly income from these properties was $12,000. I felt a wave of nausea, but I forced myself to scroll down. Julian was listed as the managing director of Sinclair Holdings. My brother, the failure, the dreamer, who could not hold down a job, was a landlord. He was on the payroll. The salary listed for him was $6,000 a month. I thought about the $2,000 I had just sent him for a suit. I thought about the times he had borrowed $50 from me for gas money, looking at me with those puppy dog eyes, promising to pay me back when his freelance gig paid out. He had been earning a salary the entire time, a salary paid, indirectly, by the capital I had provided to buy those houses. The next section of the report was titled, Lifestyle and Expenditures. Marcus had gained access to their travel records and credit card statements. The level of detail was excruciating. Remember the time 3 years ago when I sent $8,000 for my mother's experimental arthritis treatment? The dates coincided perfectly with a 2-week booking at a 5-star resort in the Maldives. They had not gone to a clinic. They had gone to a private island. I checked the social media section. I saw screenshots of Instagram posts and Facebook updates that I had never seen before, enjoying the sunset in paradise. My mother had captioned a photo of her holding a cocktail on a white sand beach. "Why did I never see this?" I whispered. I looked at the metadata Marcus had extracted. They had created a custom privacy setting group on all their social media platforms. It was titled, "Everyone Except Colette." They had been posting their luxury life for the world to see, for their friends, for their neighbors, while carefully curating a feed of misery and complaints solely for me. They had blocked me from seeing their joy, so that I would continue to fund it. I scrolled further. The stock portfolio, while I was advising them to put their meager savings into low-risk bonds, advice they laughed off, claiming they had no savings to invest. They were day trading. They had a brokerage account with a balance of nearly $200,000. The seed money for this account could be traced back to a loan I gave them 4 years ago to pay off a predatory lender who was supposedly threatening to break my father's legs. There was no predator. There was only the market. Then came the tangible assets, the boat. The audio recording had mentioned the legacy, I had hoped. Perhaps it was just a fantasy, a brochure they were looking at. Marcus had attached a photo taken yesterday at a private marina in Kirkland. It was a 40-foot cruiser, gleaming white in the rain. The name, The Legacy, was already painted on the stern in gold script. The registration documents showed the purchase was finalized 48 hours ago. The down payment matched the $15,000 I had sent for the heart surgery exactly, but that was just the deposit. The financing was secured against the equity of the Mercer Island house. Equity they had told me did not exist because the house was underwater. And then, the apartment, Julian's address. For the last 3 years, Julian had been living in a high-rise condo in downtown Bellevue. He told me he was subletting a room from a friend for a few $100s a month. He complained constantly about the noise and the smell of the roommates cooking. The deed told a different story. The apartment was not rented. It was owned by Sinclair Holdings. It had been purchased outright, cash, 3 years ago. I traced the funds. That year, I had received a massive bonus from Ether Systems. I had given my parents $50,000 as a thank you gift, and then another $40,000 later in the year, when they claimed the foundation of the Mercer Island house was sinking and needed emergency shoring. $90,000. That was the bulk of the purchase price for Julian's bachelor pad. I had bought my brother a home while I was living in a studio apartment and eating ramen noodles. I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking in the silence. The scale of the deception was not just financial, it was architectural. They had built a parallel reality. In one world, they were struggling artists and a wayward son, surviving only by the grace of their saintly daughter. In the other world, the real world, they were property moguls and investors who viewed me as a venture capital fund that did not require equity or repayment. But the final knife in the back was yet to come. The last folder in the dossier was labeled Legal Correspondence. Marcus had hacked into their family lawyer's email server. There was a thread from last month regarding their wills. I opened the PDF attached to the email. It was a draft of their last will and testament. I recommend updating the beneficiary clause. The lawyer had written, given the current asset valuation of the estate, including the new acquisition of the rental units, we need to clarify the division. My father's reply was short and brutal. Everything goes to Julian. The properties, the stock portfolio, the house, the boat, all of it. The lawyer had asked for clarification. And Colette? Standard practice is to leave a token amount to prevent the will from being contested. My mother had replied to this one, Colette does not need it. She has a high-paying job. She has already earned too much money for her own good. Giving her an inheritance would just be greedy on her part. Besides, she is the provider type, not the receiver type. Leave her nothing. She will be fine. I read the line again, greedy on her part. After I had given them $384,000, after I had denied myself a life to sustain theirs, they called me greedy for potentially wanting a share of the assets I had paid for. They were not just using me, they actively despised me for being usable. I closed the file. My hands were shaking, not from sadness, but from an overdose of adrenaline. I had the what, the where, and the how much. Now I needed the why. Why was this happening right now? Why the rush to buy the boat? Why the sudden need to secure the legacy? I went back to the email correspondence and searched for Golden Horizon. I found a thread between my father and a campaign manager named Stevens. The gala is the launch pad. Richard. Stevens had written, "If you want to run for city council next year, you need to solidify the image of the benevolent, successful family man. The voters need to see stability. They need to see philanthropy. The Golden Horizon Award will give you the credibility to announce your candidacy next month. We will be ready." Richard had replied, "The family will be there. We will look perfect." It all made sense. The sudden urgency to renovate the house with my smart system, the boat to entertain donors, the need to keep Julian looking successful. They were building a stage set for a political campaign. They wanted power. They wanted prestige. And they needed me to pay for the props. And then they needed me to stand on stage and validate their lie. They wanted me to hand them the scholarship fund check at the gala. It was not just money, it was a prop. It was proof of their good parenting that they had raised a daughter successful enough to donate. I looked at the clock. It was 1 p.m. I picked up my phone and dialed Marcus. "I got the files," I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears. Flat, metallic, devoid of any inflection. "And?" Marcus asked. "Are you going to confront them?" "No," I said. "Confrontation allows them to spin a narrative. Confrontation gives them a chance to cry and make excuses. I am going to do something else." "What do you need?" "I need access," I said. "Not just to their bank accounts. I need access to the Golden Horizon Gala's audio-visual system. I need you to get me full administrative privileges for the presentation server at the Grand Hyatt." Marcus whistled low on the other end of the line. "That is a secure network, Colette. It will take some work. What are you planning?" "I am planning a presentation," I said. "They want to show the world who the Sinclair family really is. I am going to help them. I am going to show them the data." "Colette," Marcus said, a note of warning in his voice. "If you do this, there is no going back. You burn this bridge, and you are burning it with napalm." I looked at the number on the screen one last time. $384,520. "The bridge is already gone." "Marcus," I said, "I am just clearing the debris." "All right," he said. "I will get you the keys. Give me 2 hours." I hung up. I stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window of my office. The rain had stopped, but the sky was still a bruised purple. I looked out at the city where my parents were currently laughing, drinking wine, and planning their political ascent on my dime. I was no longer the victim. I was the auditor, and the audit was finished. Now, it was time for the collections department to take over. The phone rang at exactly 2:30 in the afternoon. I knew who it was before I even looked at the screen. My mother had a rhythm to her manipulation. She always called mid-afternoon, assuming that was when my cognitive defenses were lowest after a morning of meetings. "Colette, darling," Sylvia's voice trilled through the speaker. Sweeter than spun sugar and twice as hollow. "How is my hard-working girl?" "I am fine. Mom," I said, my voice steady. I had practiced this tone in the mirror for 10 minutes before answering. It was the tone of the dutiful daughter, the compliant ATM. "How is Dad? Is he resting?" "Oh, he is battling through," she sighed, the martyr act slipping into place effortlessly. "The doctors say he needs absolute calm, but you know your father, he insists on attending the Golden Horizon Gala this Saturday. He says he cannot let the community down." I suppressed a snort of derision. He could not let the potential voters down. She meant, "That sounds risky," I said, infusing my voice with just the right amount of daughterly concern. "Should he be going out so soon after the diagnosis?" "Well, that is actually why I'm calling," Sylvia said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "We want you there. Colette, we need you there. The committee wants to present the new Sinclair Family Scholarship Fund, and since you contributed so generously to the family finances recently, your father and I decided it would be only right if you were the one to hand over the ceremonial check on stage. The audacity was breathtaking. The scholarship fund was undoubtedly the $15,000 I had sent for the heart surgery, laundered through a charitable title to buy them public goodwill. They were going to use my money to buy themselves a halo, and they wanted me to be the one to polish it for them. I would be honored, I said. I will be there. There was a pause. She clearly had not expected such immediate capitulation. Usually, I would hesitate, citing work or exhaustion, forcing her to beg or guilt-trip me. My instant agreement threw her off balance. "Oh, well, that is wonderful," she stammered. "Make sure you dress appropriately. Nothing too flashy. You know we want the focus to be on the cause, not on us." "Of course, Mom," I said. "I will be invisible." "Good girl," she said, the relief palpable. "We will see you at the Grand Hyatt at 6. I hung up and stared at the phone. Good girl. The phrase made my skin crawl. It was the same thing one said to a trained dog that had just performed a trick. I grabbed my coat and left the office. I had a meeting to attend, but not with anyone from Ether Systems. I met Marcus in a small, dimly lit coffee shop in Pioneer Square. Far away from the gleaming towers of the business district, he was already there, hunched over a laptop, wearing a hoodie that cost more than my first car. "You look like a woman on a mission," he said as I slid into the booth opposite him. "I am," I replied. "Did you get it?" He spun the laptop around. On the screen was a schematic of the Grand Hyatt's grand ballroom. It showed the layout of the speakers, the lighting rigs, and most importantly, the massive LED projection wall behind the main stage. "I have backdoor access to the AV control server," Marcus said, tapping a key. "The event company is using a standard cloud-based management system. Their password security was laughable. I have created a ghost user profile with administrative privileges. You can upload whatever content you want, and you can override their playlist from your phone." "Perfect," I said. "I need you to sync it to this." I handed him a black USB drive. "What is on this?" he asked, weighing it in his hand. "The truth," I said. "The audio recording of them laughing about the boat, the bank statements showing the transfers, the deeds to the properties, the photos of Julian's apartment. I want it all compiled into a single video file. High definition, clear audio. I want the subtitles large enough for the people in the back row to read." Marcus looked at me, his expression serious. "You know this is going to destroy them, right? Publicly, irreversibly. This isn't just a family dispute anymore. This is social execution." "They executed me first," I said coldly. "They just used a slow-acting poison. I am using a guillotine." He nodded slowly. "All right, I will render the video. I will also set up a trigger command. When you are on stage, all you have to do is press a button on this app." He pointed to a custom icon on his screen. "And the system will cut the microphone feed from the podium and route it exclusively to yours, while simultaneously hijacking the main screen." "Do it," I said. My next stop was the office of my personal attorney, a sharp-edged woman named Elena who had handled my stock options for years. She was surprised to see me without an appointment, but the look on my face told her this was urgent. "I need a document drawn up," I told her, sitting down without taking off my coat. "A formal notice of severance and a demand for repayment based on fraudulent misrepresentation." "Who is the target?" she asked, pulling out a legal pad. "Richard, Sylvia, and Julian Sinclair," I said. Elena stopped writing. She looked up, her eyebrows raised. "Your family?" "My debtors," I corrected. "I want it drafted and ready to be served. I also want to file a formal report with the IRS regarding unreported income and potential tax evasion concerning a shell company called Sinclair Holdings. Can we have that ready to go by Monday morning?" Elena smiled, a shark-like grin that made me feel safer than I had in years. "If you have the evidence, I can have the IRS audit notice on their doorstep before they finish their morning coffee." I have the evidence, I said. As I left her office, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Julian. Hey sis, hate to ask, but things are super tight. Need a new suit for the gala so I don't look like a bum next to Dad. Can you spot me 2,000? Promise I'll pay you back next week. I stared at the message. The audacity was almost impressive. He was a landlord collecting $6,000 a month, living in a condo I paid for, and he was asking me for $2,000 for a suit. I opened my banking app. I had one more transaction to make. One last investment in the performance. I transferred the $2,000. Sent. I typed back. Get something sharp. I want you to look your best. You're the best. Sis, came the reply, followed by a string of heart emojis. I pocketed the phone. Enjoy it. Julian, that is the last dime you will ever see from me. And that suit? You are going to need it for your mugshot. My final errand was purely symbolic, but necessary. I went to the bank. Not online, but to the physical branch. I sat down with a personal banker and requested a full restructuring of my accounts. I removed my parents as beneficiaries from my life insurance policy. I revoked the power of attorney I had granted my father 5 years ago, just in case. I closed the joint emergency account I had set up for them, transferring the remaining balance back to my primary savings. Are you sure you want to disable all recurring transfers? The banker asked. Looking at the long list of automated payments, electricity, water, gas, insurance, that went to the Mercer Island address. Cancel them all, I said. Effective immediately. They will receive notifications that the payments have failed, the banker warned. That is fine, I said. Let them think it is a glitch. It fits the theme. Walking out of the bank, I felt lighter. The financial umbilical cord was cut. Now, there was only the show left to produce. I drove to a high-end boutique in downtown Seattle. Usually, I shopped at sensible department stores, buying clothes in shades of gray, navy, and black, colors that allowed me to fade into the background. Just as my mother preferred, she always told me that bright colors made me look desperate for attention and lacking in class. I need a dress for a gala, I told the stylist. Black tie? Do you have a color in mind? She asked. Red, I said. The brightest, most dangerous red you have. She brought out a gown that was nothing short of a weapon. It was a deep, blood-red silk that draped like liquid fire. It had a plunging neckline and a slit up the thigh that screamed confidence. It was the kind of dress that demanded to be looked at. It was the kind of dress Sylvia Sinclair would hate with every fiber of her being. I tried it on, looking in the mirror. I didn't see the tired, mousy Colette. I saw a woman who was done hiding. I saw a woman who was ready to burn the house down. I will take it, I said. And the heels. The highest ones you have. I spent the rest of the evening in my apartment, not pacing, but preparing. I reviewed the video file Marcus sent over. It was a masterpiece of editing. The contrast between my mother's fake sobbing voice and her real, cackling laughter was jarring and effective. The zoom in on the legacy boat name was cinematic. I practiced my speech. Not the one they had written for me, the one about gratitude and family values, but the one I was going to deliver. It had to be short. It had to be sharp. It had to cut through the noise of the party like a scalpel. I lay in bed that night, the USB drive on the nightstand next to me. It looked so small, just a piece of plastic and metal. But inside it was a bomb, for the first time in 10 years. I did not dread the weekend. I did not dread seeing them. I felt a strange, electric anticipation. I was the director now. They were just actors who didn't know their lines had been rewritten. The stage was set. The props were bought. The tickets were sold. All that was left was to raise the curtain. Friday arrived wrapped in a shroud of gray mist, the kind that usually clings to the glass towers of downtown Seattle like a wet woolen blanket. In the past, this weather would have seeped into my bones, amplifying the low-level anxiety that hummed constantly beneath my skin, the worry about my father's health. the dread of the next financial demand, the crushing weight of maintaining the facade. But today, as I walked into the headquarters of Ether Systems, the rain felt different. It felt like a cleansing rinse. It felt like the world was being washed clean in preparation for something new. I took the elevator to the 42nd floor, my heels clicking a sharp, rhythmic cadence on the marble. I was 5 minutes early for the quarterly strategy review, a meeting I typically dreaded because my mind would be half occupied by my mother's text messages. Today, however, my phone was on silent, face down on the mahogany table. "Good morning, Colette," Jason, our VP of Operations, said as I entered. He looked tired. Usually, I would have stopped to ask him about his kids, to offer a sympathetic ear, to be the soft presence in the room. "Morning, Jason," I said, my voice crisp. "Let's skip the pleasantries today. I reviewed the Q3 projections you sent over last night. The user acquisition costs are off by 12%. We need to restructure the marketing spend before the board meeting on Monday." Jason blinked, startled. The room went quiet. The other executives exchanged glances. I was known for being thorough, yes, but also for being conciliatory. I was the one who smoothed over rough edges. Today, I was the blade. Yes, we can look at that," Jason stammered. "I thought we had some wiggle room." "We don't deal in wiggle room." "Jason," I interrupted, maintaining direct eye contact, "we deal in precision. If the data is flawed, the strategy is a hallucination. Fix it by noon." I sat down and opened my laptop. The meeting proceeded with a level of efficiency that was almost frightening. I cut through circular arguments. I denied budget requests that lacked clear ROI. I felt a strange, intoxicating clarity. For 10 years, I had spent so much mental energy managing the emotional volatility of my parents that I had been operating at only 80% capacity in my own life. Now that I had severed that emotional connection, that extra 20% of processing power had come online. I felt like a supercomputer that had finally closed all the background applications, slowing it down. During the coffee break, Sarah, my executive assistant, approached me cautiously. She held a cup of black coffee, exactly how I liked it, but rarely ordered because I thought it made me seem too intense. "You're on fire today, Ms. Sinclair," she said, placing the cup down. "I've never seen you shut Jason down like that. Is everything okay?" She was probing for distress, expecting me to look tired or weepy. "Everything is perfect, Sarah," I said, taking a sip. The bitter heat was grounding. "I just decided to stop tolerating inefficiency in all aspects of my life." Sarah nodded slowly, looking at me with a newfound respect. Or perhaps fear. "Well, it suits you. You look lighter." I was lighter. $384,000 lighter, to be precise. And soon, I would be free. My phone buzzed against the table surface. It was the only notification I had allowed through the filter. Richard Sinclair. I picked it up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the sound. I pressed play on the voice note. "Colette." My father's voice scratched through the speaker, breathless and weak. It was a performance worthy of an Academy Award, if the Academy gave awards for fraud. "Colette, honey, just a reminder about tomorrow. Please don't forget the savings passbook you promised. The bank needs to see the liquidity for that bridge loan I told you about for the business. I don't want to bother you, but my chest is a bit tight today, and I just need this settled so I can rest." I listened to it twice. The first time, I analyzed the audio quality. The background was silent, too silent. He was likely in his soundproofed study, the one I had paid to renovate. The second time, I analyzed the syntax. Bridge loan, liquidity, buzzwords he barely understood, but knew would trigger my professional responsibility. He wasn't asking for money to spend. He was asking for the physical passbook to show the bank. It was a lie. He wanted the passbook so he could drain the account the moment he got his hands on it. He thought there was $50,000 in there, a rainy day fund I had foolishly mentioned months ago. He had no idea the account was already empty. I held the record button. I did not try to sound weak. I did not try to sound apologetic. I pitched my voice to be warm, soothing, and utterly impenetrable. "Don't worry about anything. Dad," I said, "I have prepared everything you need. I'll bring the documents to the gala. Trust me. Tomorrow is going to be a day none of us will ever forget. Rest up. You'll need your strength." I hit send. Let him interpret that as reassurance. Let him sleep soundly tonight, dreaming of the zeros in my bank account. I spent the lunch hour in my office, but I did not eat. I sat with my personal phone, scrolling through the photo gallery. It was a digital graveyard of my own gullibility. There was a photo of me and my mother at a winery 2 years ago. We were smiling. I remembered that day. I had paid for the tasting, the lunch, and the 3 cases of Reserve Cabernet she insisted on bringing home. She had told me I was finally becoming sophisticated. Delete. There was a photo of Julian and me at his graduation, the one I paid for after he lost his scholarship. He had his arm around me, looking smug. I looked exhausted. Delete. There was a selfie of the 4 of us at Christmas. The tree in the background was 12 feet tall, a monstrosity they insisted on having, which I had purchased. Delete. I selected them in batches, hundreds of images, thousands of memories that I had curated to convince myself I was loved. It was a purge. With every tap of the trash icon, I felt a physical sensation of untethering. I wasn't just deleting pixels. I was deleting the narrative they had written for me. I was erasing the Colette who begged for scraps of affection. When the gallery was empty, displaying only the default no photos icon, I set the phone down. It was done. There was no evidence left on my device that I belonged to them. The only evidence that remained was on the USB drive currently locked in my safe. At 3 p.m, a secure chat window popped up on my laptop screen. It was Marcus. "We are in." The message read, "I have bypassed the hotel's firewall. I have remote administrative access to the main projection system, the lighting grid, and the microphone inputs. I have created a localized hotspot for your phone. As soon as you connect to it tomorrow, your device becomes the master controller. The trigger code is set. 1 tap, and the show is yours." I typed back, "Any chance of them overriding it?" "0. Marcus replied, "I locked out the venue's tech team about 10 minutes ago. They think it's a firmware update glitch. By the time they figure out how to reboot the physical server, your speech will be over. You have the floor. Colette, make it count." "I will," I replied. A few minutes later, an email notification pinged. It was from the Golden Horizon Gala Committee. Subject: Final confirmation via IP, acknowledgement, hurrah. Ms. Sinclair, we are writing to confirm the final run of show for tomorrow evening. We are so looking forward to honoring your family. We also wanted to extend a special private thank you. Your parents, Mr. and Mrs. Sinclair, informed us that the funding for the new Sinclair Arts Scholarship was made possible through a generous donation from your family trust. As such, we have listed the Sinclair family as a diamond sponsor in the program brochure. We understand your parents wish to remain humble, but we wanted to ensure you knew how much we appreciate this contribution. I stared at the screen, a cold smile touching my lips. Humble. They had taken the $15,000 I sent for a life-saving surgery, money they claimed was already gone, spent on doctors, and they had donated a portion of it to the gala to buy themselves a diamond sponsor title. They were using my money to buy a trophy for their own vanity, all while laughing at me for being the cash cow. They weren't just thieves. They were narcissists of the highest order. They wanted the glory of philanthropy without the pain of parting with their own wealth. They wanted me to pay for the applause they would receive. I didn't reply to the email. There was no need. I would deliver my response in person. I left work at 5 sharp. I didn't go to the gym. I didn't go grocery shopping. I went straight to my penthouse. The apartment was quiet. But for the first time, the silence didn't feel lonely. It felt strategic. It was the silence of a war room before the strike. I hung the red dress on the outside of the closet door. It hung there like a flag, vibrant and violent against the white minimalism of my bedroom. I stood in front of the full-length mirror in my bathroom. I held a hairbrush like a microphone. I looked at my own eyes. They were dark, steady, and devoid of the pleading softness that had defined me for a decade. "Mom, Dad," I said to the reflection, "I am so honored to be here." My voice was too high, too eager. I shook my head. "I stand here tonight to celebrate sacrifice." I tried again. This was the script they had emailed me. The words tasted like ash. The sacrifice my parents made for. I stopped. I dropped the hand holding the brush. I squared my shoulders. I lowered my chin. "My parents taught me that truth is the most expensive commodity," I said, my voice dropping to a lower register, resonant and commanding. "And tonight, I am here to balance the ledger." Yes, that was it. I practiced the pauses. I practiced the exact moment I would look at my father. I practiced the smile I would wear, not a smile of joy, but the thin, sharp smile of a predator that has cornered its prey. I rehearsed the physical act of tapping the execute button on my phone screen. I did not pace. I did not fret. I felt a strange calm, a dissociation that was almost peaceful. I was no longer their daughter. I was the hand of fate. At 10 o'clock, I turned off the lights. Usually, on the night before a family gathering, I would be awake until 3 in the morning, staring at the ceiling, calculating how much money I had in my checking account, wondering if my outfit would be criticized, wondering if I would say something stupid that would make my mother sigh. Tonight, I climbed into bed and pulled the cool duvet up to my chin. I closed my eyes. There were no spinning numbers. There were no voices of guilt. There was only the hum of the city outside and the certainty of the data I possessed. I had the receipts. I had the recordings. I had the power. I fell asleep within minutes. It was a deep, black, dreamless sleep. The kind of sleep enjoyed by the innocent, or the ruthlessly just. It was the best sleep I had had in 10 years. Tomorrow, the storm would break. But tonight, I was the eye of the hurricane, and I was perfectly, terrifyingly still. The grand ballroom of the Grand Hyatt. Seattle was a cavern of manufactured starlight, 12 crystal chandeliers, each the size of a small hatchback, hung from the vaulted ceiling, casting a fractured, diamond-hard brilliance onto the crowd below. The air smelled of expensive lilies, truffle oil, and the metallic tang of ambition. It was the specific scent of charity galas, a perfume composed of equal parts altruism and tax write-offs. I stood at the top of the velvet-carpeted staircase, looking down into the pit. The room was a sea of black tuxedos and designer gowns. I saw the faces of city council members, tech CEOs, and old-money matriarchs whose last names were etched onto hospital wings. They swirled around round tables draped in heavy gold satin, holding flutes of champagne that cost more per glass than most people earned in a day. It was a beautiful, shimmering ecosystem of wealth. And tonight, my family was at the very top of the food chain. I spotted them instantly. It was impossible not to. They were holding court near the center of the room, positioned perfectly beneath the largest chandelier, so the light would catch my mother's jewelry. Richard Sinclair looked every inch the distinguished patriarch. He wore a bespoke tuxedo with a midnight blue lapel, his silver hair coiffed into a wave of statesmanlike gravitas. He was laughing, one hand resting paternally on the shoulder of the deputy mayor, looking for all the world like a man whose heart was strong, whose conscience was clear, and whose bank account was legitimate. Beside him stood Sylvia, my mother. She was wearing a champagne-colored gown that shimmered like fish scales. Her neck was draped in a diamond choker, vintage, or so she told people, that I knew she had bought 3 months ago using the money I had transferred for emergency legal fees regarding a non-existent property dispute. She looked radiant. She looked like a queen. She was nodding graciously at a woman I recognized as the head of the local arts council, playing the role of the humble philanthropist to perfection. And then there was Julian. My brother stood slightly to their left, sipping a martini. He was wearing the suit, the $2,000 suit I had paid for yesterday. It was a slim-fit Italian cut that accentuated his height, making him look less like a failed entrepreneur and more like a young titan of industry. He was leaning in to whisper something to a young blonde woman, probably spinning a tale about his latest venture capital success. They looked like a portrait of the American dream. They looked perfect. I took a breath. The air in my lungs felt cold and sharp. I reached into my clutch and touched the smooth surface of my phone. The weapon was primed. I began to descend the stairs. Usually, I would have arrived 20 minutes early, dressed in a sensible navy dress, fading into the wallpaper until my mother summoned me to fetch her a drink. But tonight, I was late. And tonight, I was not wearing navy. The red dress moved around my legs like liquid mercury. It was a violent, unapologetic scarlet, the color of a warning sign, the color of blood. As I stepped onto the ballroom floor, the ambient chatter near the entrance died down. Heads turned. I felt the gaze of the room shift. Men paused mid-sentence. Women narrowed their eyes, assessing the cut, the fabric, the sheer audacity of the color in a room of safe pastels and blacks. I walked with a slow, deliberate cadence. I did not hunch my shoulders. I did not look at the floor. I looked straight ahead, carving a path through the crowd. The guests parted for me, murmuring. I heard whispers of, "Who is that? And is that the daughter?" I approached the inner circle. My mother was the first to see me. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second. Her eyes widened, darting from my face to the plunging neckline of my dress, then down to the thigh-high slit. I saw the flash of pure, unadulterated fury in her pupils. It was the look she used to give me when I spilled juice on the carpet as a child, a look of disgust and ownership. But Sylvia Sinclair was a professional. Before the person she was talking to could notice, the mask slammed back into place. Her lips stretched into a wide, beaming smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. "Colette!" she exclaimed, her voice pitched high enough for the surrounding tables to hear. "There is our girl!" She stepped forward and embraced me. Her body was stiff as she pressed her cheek against mine. The smell of her expensive perfume, Chanel No. 5, bought with my Christmas bonus, filled my nose. "You are late," she hissed into my ear, her voice a low frequency of venom that only I could hear. "And what in God's name are you wearing? You look like a showgirl. I told you to be modest." I pulled back, keeping a polite, public smile plastered on my face. "Hello, Mother. You look expensive tonight." Her eyes narrowed. She didn't like the word expensive. She preferred elegant. "Keep your voice down," she whispered, her fingers digging into my forearm with bruising force. "Do you have it? The passbook? Your father is vibrating with anxiety. Give it to me now so I can slip it to him." I looked at her. I looked at the desperation lurking beneath the heavy layer of foundation. She didn't want the passbook to show the bank. She wanted to leave this party, go to an ATM, and drain it before midnight. "I have it," I said, patting my clutch. "Give it to me," she demanded, holding out a manicured hand. "No," I said softly. Sylvia froze. "Excuse me?" "Not here," I said, widening my smile as a photographer snapped a picture of us. "It's too significant. Mom, I want to give it to him on stage. When I present the scholarship, I want everyone to see it. I want the whole room to witness the moment I hand over my life savings to support the family legacy. Think of the optics. A devoted daughter, giving everything she has to her hero father. The crowd will eat it up." I watched the gears turn in her head. She was calculating. Greed wrestled with control. If she took it now, she had the money safe. But if I gave it on stage? The drama, the public adoration, the validation of her narrative that they had raised a saintly, sacrificial child. It appealed to her narcissism. Her hand dropped. The greed won. "Fine," she whispered, her eyes gleaming with a predatory hunger. "That is actually a good idea. But do not make a speech about yourself. Keep it focused on us, on the sacrifice we made to raise you." "Of course," I said. "It is all about you. It has always been all about you. She patted my cheek, a gesture that looked affectionate but felt like a slap. Good. Now go find your seat. You are at table 42, near the kitchen. We didn't want to crowd the VIP table. Naturally, I said. I turned to my father. Richard was beaming at me, or rather, beaming at the imaginary checkbook in my purse. "Colette," he boomed, playing the jovial dad. "You look striking. Very bold." "Hello? Dad," I said. "Ready for the big night?" "Born ready," he winked. "Just remember the script. Honey, short and sweet. Don't bore them." "I promise," I said. "It will be memorable." I walked away from the center of the room, towards the back, where the tables were less decorated and the service was slower. Table 42 was indeed next to the swinging doors of the kitchen. Every time a waiter exited with a tray of salmon, a waft of steam and shouting hit the back of my neck. My table mates were the B-list invitees. A distant cousin of a councilman, a local librarian who had won a ticket in a raffle, and a couple of junior staffers from the charity organization. They looked at my dress with confusion, wondering why someone dressed like a Bond villain was sitting in the cheap seats. "I'm Colette," I said, taking my seat. "The daughter." "Oh," the librarian gasped. "The Sinclair daughter? We were just talking about your parents. They are such saints. The donation they made for the Heart Wing last year? Incredible." I unfolded my napkin. "Yes," I said smoothly. "My parents are full of surprises. I heard your father turned down a fortune in the corporate world to focus on art and philanthropy," the cousin said, leaning in. "A man of principle, rare these days." "Very rare," I agreed. I poured myself a glass of water. My hand was steady. "He certainly has a unique way of managing finances." As the appetizers were served, a tasteless crab cake that probably cost $50 a plate, I simply observed. I watched my parents working the room. They were in their element. They moved from table to table, shaking hands, accepting praise, looking humble and gracious. I saw my mother wipe a fake tear from her eye as she spoke to the bishop. It was a masterclass in deception, and everyone was buying it. Suddenly, a shadow fell over my table. I looked up. Julian was standing there. He had a glass of scotch in one hand and was swirling it arrogantly. He looked down at me, a smirk playing on his lips. "Nice table. Sis," he drawled. "Great view of the exit signs." "Hello, Julian," I said. "Nice suit. It fits well." "Custom," he lied, smoothing the lapel. "Italian wool, only the best. You wouldn't know much about that, though off the rack is more your style." He didn't know I had the receipt for that suit on the USB drive in my pocket. He didn't know I had the timestamp of the transaction. "You look red," he laughed, gesturing to my dress. "Trying to attract a husband finally? A bit desperate, don't you think? Mom is going to have a stroke looking at you." "Mom will survive," I said calmly. "How is the apartment? The one you are renting?" Julian blinked. For a second, a flicker of unease crossed his face. He quickly covered it. "It's fine. Noisy neighbors. You know how it is. Actually, I am thinking of upgrading. I have been looking at this new Porsche, the 911. I think it fits my brand." "Your brand?" I asked. "Yeah. You know, young executive, disruptor. I need a car that says I have arrived." "I thought you were broke," I said, taking a sip of water. "I just sent you money yesterday." He leaned in, his breath smelling of expensive scotch and entitlement. "Cash flow. Colette, it is complicated. You wouldn't understand high finance. You just punch numbers into a computer. I deal in vision." "Besides," he grinned, a cruel, boyish grin. "Dad says the scholarship fund is just the beginning. Once he gets on the city council, the contracts will start flowing. We are going to be set. Well, we are—" He emphasized the "we" to clearly exclude me. "That sounds like a solid plan," I said. "Enjoy the Porsche. Julian, I hope it handles corners well." "Better than your Honda," he sneered. "Anyway, try not to trip on your way up to the stage later. Don't embarrass us. He turned on his heel and sauntered back to the VIP table, high-fiving a waiter on the way. I watched him go. I felt a strange sense of pity. Not for him, but for the sheer magnitude of the reality check that was about to hit him. He was a child playing dress-up in a burning building. The lights in the ballroom dimmed. The chatter died down. A spotlight hit the main stage. The master of ceremonies, a local news anchor with perfect teeth and a tan that came from a bottle, walked up to the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen," he boomed, his voice echoing through the massive sound system. "Welcome to the Golden Horizon Gala. Tonight, we celebrate the spirit of giving. Tonight, we honor those who have given not just their wealth, but their hearts, to our community." Applause rippled through the room. I clapped slowly, rhythmically. "But first," the MC continued, "we want to share a story of a family that has quietly, humbly, supported the arts and healthcare in our city for decades. Please turn your attention to the screens for a tribute to our guests of honor, the Sinclair family. The massive LED wall behind the stage, which spanned 40 feet, flickered to life. Soft, sentimental piano music began to play. I watched as the video began. It was a montage of lies. There was a photo of my father in a hard hat, pointing at a building site. The caption read, "Building the Future." I knew that photo. He had put on the hard hat for 30 seconds during a tour of a site he had nothing to do with. There was a clip of my mother serving soup at a shelter. Compassion in action. She had done that once, for a court-ordered community service requirement after a speeding ticket, and complained about the smell for weeks. Then, there was a photo of the three of them, Richard, Sylvia, and Julian, on a sailboat. The sun was setting behind them. They looked golden. A legacy of love. I was not in the photo. I had been at work that weekend, covering an extra shift to pay for the emergency engine repair for that very boat. The narrator's voice was deep and reverence-filled. Richard and Sylvia Sinclair, two hearts beating as one, they sacrificed their own artistic careers to raise a family, to build a community, and to nurture the next generation. At the VIP table, I saw my mother dab her eyes with a handkerchief. My father held her hand. Looking stoic, Julian looked proud. The crowd was eating it up. I heard sniffles from the table next to me. "They are so inspiring," the librarian whispered, wiping a tear. "Yes," I said, my voice low in the darkness. "They certainly tell a good story." The video montage faded to black, leaving the ballroom in a heavy, reverent silence. Then, a single spotlight cut through the darkness, illuminating my father, Richard Sinclair, standing at the podium. He did not look like a man who had just swindled his daughter out of nearly $400,000. He looked like a weary saint. He gripped the sides of the podium with both hands, his head bowed slightly as if the weight of his own altruism was too heavy to bear. "Thank you," he whispered into the microphone. His voice cracked perfectly on the second syllable. He cleared his throat, a sound that suggested deep, suppressed emotion. "Thank you. When Sylvia and I started our journey 40 years ago, we did not have much. We did not have trust funds. We did not have connections. We had a basement apartment in Queen Anne with a leaking radiator, and we had a dream." I took a slow sip of my wine. The Pinot Noir tasted like copper in my mouth. They had never lived in a basement. My grandfather had bought them a 4-bedroom colonial as a wedding gift. "But we made a vow," Richard continued, lifting his head to scan the room with misty eyes. "We vowed that our children would never know the hunger we felt. Not physical hunger, though there were nights we skipped dinner so they could have seconds, but the hunger for love. We decided that we would raise them not with material wealth, but with the currency of the heart." A murmur of approval rippled through the crowd. I saw the deputy mayor nod solemnly. "People ask us how we did it," Richard said, his voice gaining strength, booming with paternal pride. "How did we raise a daughter who is a leader in the tech world? How did we raise a son who is pioneering new business ventures? We did it by teaching them that money is paper, but family is iron. We taught them that sacrifice is the highest form of currency." He wiped a tear from his cheek. It was a real tear. My father could cry on command. He used to do it to get out of speeding tickets. We gave them everything, he concluded, his voice trembling. And standing here tonight, seeing what they have become, it was worth every penny we never spent on ourselves. The applause was thunderous. I watched a woman at the next table dab her eyes with a napkin. He is so inspiring, she sniffed. You are so lucky to have a father like that. Yes, I said, staring at the screen of my phone, where the signal strength was holding steady at 4 bars. Luck has nothing to do with it, my mother, Sylvia, stepped up to the microphone next. If Richard was the humble servant, Sylvia was the tragic heroine. She placed a hand over her heart, her diamond bracelets catching the light. Bracelets bought with the money I had sent for her emergency dental surgery 6 months ago. Richard speaks of sacrifice, she began, her voice soft and flute-like. But he forgets the darkest nights, I remember. She paused, looking down at her hands. I remember when Colette was 6 years old. I froze. I was never sick when I was 6. I had chickenpox. And that was it. She was struck down by a rare autoimmune disorder. Sylvia lied, her voice gaining a breathless, storytelling quality. The doctors said there was no hope. They said the treatment was experimental and cost more than our house was worth. We didn't hesitate, did we, Richard? Richard shook his head solemnly in the background. We sold everything, Sylvia announced, looking out at the audience with the gaze of a martyr. We sold the art gallery. We sold the family heirlooms. We sold the car. We moved into a motel for 3 months just to pay for the specialists. Because what is a painting compared to the life of a child? The room was deadly silent now. I could hear the hum of the air conditioning. And today, Sylvia smiled through her tears. When I look at Colette, healthy and strong, running board meetings, I don't see a CEO. I see the miracle that love bought. It was a monstrous lie, a fabrication so complete it took my breath away. There was no illness. There was no motel. They had sold the art gallery because Richard had been caught selling forgeries, and they needed to pay off the legal settlement to avoid jail time. They had spun their own criminal negligence into a bedtime story of parental salvation. I looked down at my phone. Marcus had sent a green thumbs-up emoji. The system was primed. The audio files were queued. The evidence of their motel stay, which was actually a luxury cruise to the Bahamas that year, was ready to launch. And let us not forget, the MC interrupted, stepping back in as the applause died down. The future of the Sinclair legacy, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the young man who carries the torch of this family's entrepreneurial spirit, the managing director of Sinclair Holdings, Mr. Julian Sinclair. Julian bounded onto the stage. He didn't walk. He jogged, exuding the manic energy of a golden retriever that had just been given a new toy. He waved to the crowd, flashing a smile that was all teeth and charm. Thank you, Julian shouted, grabbing the mic. Wow, following these 2 acts? Tough crowd. He laughed, and the audience chuckled with him. They loved him. They saw a young, vibrant businessman. They didn't see the 30-year-old man who had texted me yesterday begging for $2,000 because he couldn't manage his own cash flow. I just want to say, Julian said, hooking his thumbs into the pockets of the suit I paid for, that my parents are my heroes. They taught me that success isn't about what you keep, it's about what you give, and that is why I am so proud to lead Sinclair Holdings, a company dedicated to ethical property management and community development. Ethical property management. I almost choked on my wine. He was a slumlord who evicted single mothers if they were 3 days late on rent, using a shell company to shield his name from the lawsuits. We are building a legacy, Julian said, pointing to the ceiling. A legacy of truth. That was the trigger word, truth. The MC stepped forward again, beaming. What a family. Truly, what a family. And now, for the moment we have all been waiting for, we have a special presentation, a gesture of gratitude from the next generation to the first. Please welcome to the stage the woman of the hour, Ms. Colette Sinclair, to present the Sinclair family gift. The spotlight hit me. I stood up. In the past, this walk would have been the longest mile of my life. I would have been hunched over, clutching my purse, terrified of tripping, terrified of my mother's criticism, terrified of taking up space. I would have been the mouse scuttling across the floor to drop a crumb at the feet of lions. But tonight, I did not scuttle. I drained the last drop of wine from my glass and set it down on the table with a definitive clink. I smoothed the silk of my red dress. I picked up my clutch, inside of which sat the USB drive. Not that I needed it, since Marcus had everything in the cloud. But I liked the weight of it. I began to walk. The heels I had bought were 4 inches high, sharp as stilettos. They clicked against the parquet floor. A rhythmic countdown. Click, click, click. Heads turned as I passed. I heard the rustle of fabric as people shifted to get a better look. "That dress," someone whispered. "She looks intense," another murmured. I kept my chin high. I did not smile at the guests. I did not wave. I walked with the singular focus of an executioner climbing the scaffold. As I reached the stairs to the stage, my mother's eyes locked onto mine. From a distance, she looked like a beaming, proud mother. But as I got closer, as I ascended the steps and entered her orbit, the smile became a rictus of tension. I stepped onto the platform. The lights were blindingly hot. The smell of the lilies was overpowering, mixed with the cloying scent of my father's cologne, a scent I associated with lectures about my selfishness. I walked straight toward them. Richard opened his arms as if to hug me, a gesture for the cameras. I sidestepped him smoothly, moving directly to the podium. Sylvia intercepted me. She leaned in, ostensibly to kiss my cheek, but her hand clamped onto my upper arm like a vice. Her nails dug into my flesh. "Smile," she hissed, the word escaping through her teeth like steam from a kettle. "You look like a corpse. Fix your face and give us the book, now. Don't worry." "Mother," I whispered back, my voice calm and pleasant. "I am going to give you everything you deserve." I pulled away from her. I saw a flicker of confusion in her eyes. She wasn't used to me pulling away. She wasn't used to the cold, hard set of my jaw. I stepped up to the microphone. It was heavy, chrome-plated, cold to the touch. I adjusted the height. I took a moment to look out at the audience. 500 people, 500 of Seattle's elite. They were waiting for a tearful tribute. They were waiting for the good daughter to cry and thank her parents for selling the non-existent art gallery to save her from the non-existent disease. I placed my phone on the lectern. The screen was glowing. The red button was pulsing. I looked at Julian. He was standing slightly behind our parents, looking bored, checking his watch. He thought the performance was over. He thought the check was in the mail. I looked at Richard. He gave me a sharp nod. A command. "Read the script." I looked at Sylvia. She was smoothing her dress, already preparing her pose for the photo op. I took a deep breath. The air tasted of victory. "Good evening," I said. My voice boomed through the hall, clear and unwavering. It bounced off the crystal chandeliers and settled over the crowd like a heavy blanket. I paused. I let the silence stretch. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. It was enough to make people lean forward. "My parents," I began, turning slightly to gesture at them. They preened. "My parents always taught me that the truth is the most precious gift you can give to the ones you love." Richard nodded sagely. This was close enough to the script. He relaxed. I turned back to the audience. I gripped the sides of the podium, not for support, but to anchor myself against the recoil of the weapon I was about to fire. "They taught me that actions speak louder than words," I continued. "They taught me that family supports family, no matter the cost." "Amen!" someone shouted from the back. "And so," I said, my voice dropping an octave, becoming steelier, harder. "In honor of their 40 years of creativity and in honor of the $384,520 that has passed between us." My mother's head snapped toward me. She heard the number. She knew the number. I smiled. And today, I said, my finger hovering over the screen, I am going to give them exactly that, the truth. I pressed the button. I signaled to the back of the room, a small nod that was barely a movement of my head, but it was enough. The massive LED wall behind me, which had been glowing with the soft golden hues of the Legacy of Love slideshow, blinked once. Then, it went pitch black. The sudden darkness behind the podium created a vacuum in the room. The sentimental piano music cut out with a sharp, digital snap, leaving a silence so profound that I could hear the hum of the cooling fans in the overhead projectors. I have prepared a special video, I said into the microphone. My voice was calm, conversational, as if I were introducing a birthday montage. A behind-the-scenes look at the true heart of the Sinclair family, my parents. Standing a few feet away, relaxed visibly, they exchanged a glance of relief. They thought I had prepared a tribute. They thought I had compiled home movies, or perhaps recorded a tearful testimonial about their generosity. My mother even tilted her head to the side, adopting her touched by grace expression, readying herself to be adored. Then, the sound system roared to life. It was not music. It was not a voiceover. It was a sound so crisp and high fidelity that it felt as if the speakers were inside everyone's ears. Pop. The distinct, unmistakable sound of a champagne cork leaving a bottle echoed through the grand ballroom. It was followed by the glug 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 of liquid pouring into crystal. A ripple of confusion went through the crowd. I saw the deputy mayor frown. I saw the bishop tilt his head. Then came the laughter. It was my mother's laughter. But it was not the polite, tinkling laugh she used at galas. It was her real laugh. A sharp, jagged cackle that sounded like glass being ground in a disposal. "To the art of the deal!" Richard's voice boomed from the speakers. It was loud. It was triumphant. It was the voice of a man counting his winnings. On stage, the real Richard Sinclair froze. His eyes went wide. He looked at the speakers, then at me, then back at the speakers, his brain struggling to process the cognitive dissonance. "To the art of the daughter," the recorded Sylvia replied. I watched the crowd. They were still confused, thinking perhaps this was some avant-garde artistic intro. But then, the hammer fell. "Did the transfer clear?" the recorded Sylvia asked. "Cleared this morning," recorded Richard replied, his voice dripping with arrogance. $15,000, easy as breathing. I told you she would panic if I mentioned the word heart. She has always been morbidly terrified of being an orphan. The air left the room. It happened in an instant. 500 people inhaled simultaneously, a collective gasp that sucked the oxygen right out of the ballroom. The smile on my mother's face did not just fade. It shattered. It looked like a ceramic mask that had been dropped on concrete. Her mouth hung open, but no sound came out. She stared at the black screen as if it were a portal to hell. 15,000, the recorded Sylvia mused, her voice amplified to a deafening volume. That covers the deposit perfectly. Captain Henderson said if we didn't put the money down by Wednesday, he would sell the Legacy to that developer from Vancouver. It is a beautiful vessel, recorded Richard said. 40 feet of Italian design. We are going to look magnificent pulling into the marina next summer. I looked out at the audience. The confusion had evaporated, replaced by a dawning, horrified comprehension. They looked from the stage to the screen. They looked at the man who had just claimed to sell his art gallery to save his dying child, now listening to himself brag about swindling that same child to buy a yacht. "And Colette?" the recorded Richard snorted. "Colette is the child of our bills. She is an ATM that breathes," he continued. "A walking, talking bank balance. Do you know what she said when I told her about the surgery? She asked if she should fly down." "Oh, God, no," the recorded Sylvia groaned. "She is so exhausting to be around, all that staring. She looks at us like she is trying to solve an equation." I saw the librarian at table 42 cover her mouth with her hand. I saw the deputy mayor slowly lower his champagne glass to the table. his face hardening into stone. On stage, panic finally overrode the shock. "Turn it off!" Richard screamed. He didn't use the microphone, but he didn't need to. He lunged toward the side of the stage, waving his arms at the technical booth. "Cut the sound. It is a fake. It is AI. Turn it off." But the sound did not stop. And now, the visuals began. The black screen exploded into light. It was not a video, it was a spreadsheet. But it was the most damaging spreadsheet in the history of Seattle society. Marcus had designed the slides for maximum impact. On the left side of the split screen, under a header glowing in red labeled "The Lie," was a scanned image of the text message my father sent me 3 days ago. "My heart is failing. Need $15,000 for surgery, or I might not make it to the weekend." On the right side, under a header in gold labeled "The Truth," was a bank transfer receipt dated the exact same day. Transfer of $15,000 to Henderson Marine Luxury Sales. Memo. Deposit for the Legacy Yacht. The crowd murmured. It was a low, angry sound, like a hive of bees being disturbed. The slide changed. The Lie. An email from Julian to me. "Sis, I'm about to get evicted. My landlord is a tyrant. Can you send $2,000 for rent?" The Truth. A deed of ownership. Owner, Sinclair Holdings. Manager, Julian Sinclair. Property value, $1.2 million. Mortgage status, paid in full. I looked at Julian. He was backing away from the podium, his face the color of old ash. He looked at his rented suit, then at the screen, terrified that the receipt for that would appear next. It did. The Lie. Need a suit to honor Dad. I'm broke. The Truth. Transaction. $2,000. Armani Exchange. Card holder. Colette Sinclair. "Lies!" Sylvia shrieked. She abandoned her pose and rushed toward me. "She hacked the system. She is mentally unstable. Don't look at it." She reached for the microphone in my hand. I didn't flinch. I simply took one step back, my movements fluid and precise in the red dress. She grabbed at empty air, her claws missing my arm by inches. She stumbled in her heels, catching herself on the podium, looking wild and deranged. "I am not finished," I said. My voice was cool, cutting through her hysteria like a blade. I tapped the screen of my phone again. The slide changed to a map. It was a satellite view of King County. 3 bright red pins dropped onto the map, accompanied by a heavy thud sound effect. Pin 1, Mercer Island Estate. Estimated value, $2.5 million. Pin 2, Bellevue Condo. Estimated value, $1.2 million. Pin 3, Queen Anne Rental Triplex. Estimated value, $800,000. A total sum appeared in the center of the screen in massive, bold font. Total assets, $4,500,000. Beneath it, a smaller number in red. Taxes paid in last 5 years, 0. The room erupted. This was no longer just a family drama. This was a scandal. I saw journalists in the back row, who had been bored 10 minutes ago, now furiously typing on their phones. Flashes began to pop, blinding and rapid. Richard was at the edge of the stage, screaming at the tech crew. "I will sue you. I will sue this entire hotel. Shut it down." The tech crew, who were locked out of their own system, merely shrugged, pointing at their unresponsive consoles. I watched my father. The man who had loomed over my life like a titan was now just a small, red-faced man shouting at a computer screen. He looked ridiculous. He looked powerless. Sylvia had recovered her balance and turned to the audience. She tried to salvage the unsalvageable. "It is a misunderstanding," she pleaded, her voice cracking, the flute-like quality gone, replaced by a desperate screech. "Colette is sick. She has always been jealous of Julian. She is trying to frame us. We are good people. We are the victims here." "The victim?" I asked into the microphone. The room quieted down to hear my response. "You called me a cash cow," I said. "You called me an appliance. You laughed while I worked 80-hour weeks to pay for your vacations. And you know what the saddest part is? I looked at them. I looked at the three of them, the father, the mother, the golden son, huddled together in their expensive clothes, surrounded by the digital evidence of their greed. I would have given it to you anyway, I said softly, if you had just asked, if you had just loved me, but you didn't want a daughter, you wanted a diversified portfolio. Shut up, Julian yelled. Just shut up, you psycho. He lunged at me. It was a clumsy, desperate move. But before he could reach me, the slide on the screen changed one last time. It wasn't a bank statement. It wasn't a map. It was a screenshot of a text message. A single text message bubble, blue against a white background. It was the message I had sent to the Sinclair Family Love group chat exactly 10 seconds ago. The text on the screen was 10 feet tall. Every person in the room could read it. Even the waiters standing by the kitchen doors froze to read it. It read, "Transaction declined. Your love account has been permanently frozen due to fraudulent activity." I pointed to the screen. "I believe," I said, my voice ringing with finality, "that is my resignation letter." The reaction was instantaneous. It wasn't applause. It was a roar of shock, a chaotic mix of gasps, shouts, and the frantic murmuring of 500 people realizing they had just witnessed a social execution. Richard fell back against the speaker stack, clutching his chest. This time, perhaps, for real. Sylvia stood frozen, staring at the giant text message, her face pale as a sheet. Julian looked at the crowd, seeing the disgust in their eyes, and realized his brand had just been incinerated. I stood alone at the podium in my red dress, the calm eye of the storm, watching the house of cards collapse. It was beautiful, it was terrifying, and it was worth every single penny. The text message did not just appear on the screen behind me, it loomed. It was projected onto the 200-inch LED wall with such high definition that the pixels were invisible, making the words look like they had been branded onto the darkness in glowing blue neon. To the 500 guests sitting in the grand ballroom, it was no longer a gala, it was a courtroom, and the evidence was 40 feet wide. Transaction declined. Your love account has been permanently frozen due to fraudulent activity. The sentence hung there, absolute and unyielding. It was the final punchline to a joke that had lasted a decade. I could hear the collective intake of breath from the audience, a sound that was less like a gasp and more like the air being sucked out of the room by the sheer gravity of the humiliation. I stood at the podium, my hands resting lightly on the cold metal. I felt a sensation I had never experienced in my entire life. It was not happiness, it was not relief, it was weightlessness. For 10 years, I had walked with lead weights strapped to my ankles, dragging the heavy, rotting corpse of my parents' expectations. Now, the weights were gone. I leaned into the microphone. The acoustics of the room were perfect, capturing the slightest inflection of my voice. I did not need to shout. I spoke with the quiet, terrifying authority of a creditor who has come to foreclose on a delinquent property. For 10 years, I said, my voice cutting through the stunned silence like a diamond cutter through glass. I have played the role you assigned me, the quiet daughter, the dutiful banker, the insurance policy against your own incompetence. I looked down at my father. Richard was leaning against the speaker stack, his face a mask of gray ash. He looked small, the titan of industry, the philanthropist, the patriarch. He had shrunk into a frightened old man in a rented tuxedo. I have run the numbers, I continued, letting the data speak for me. I have audited the ledger, and the final tally is in. I paused, letting the anticipation build. $384,520, I stated. I enunciated every syllable. That is the price tag you put on my love. That is the cost of the family support I have provided while you laughed at my gullibility over champagne. You called me an ATM. You called me a bill. I took a step back from the podium, unhooking the microphone from its stand. I walked to the edge of the stage, towering over them in my blood-red dress. Well, I said, looking directly into my mother's terrified eyes. "Today, I am closing the account. The debt is paid in full." I reached into the leather clutch I had been holding. I did not pull out a tissue. I did not pull out a checkbook. I pulled out a thick, heavy manila envelope. It was bulging with documents. Inside were the deeds to the shell companies, the tax returns that showed zero income while they bought yachts, and the email threads where they conspired to cut me out of the will. I held it up for a moment, letting the stage lights catch the stark, official nature of the package. "This is my parting gift," I said. I threw it. I did not hand it to them. I tossed it with a flick of my wrist. The heavy file spun through the air and landed with a wet, heavy thud right at my father's feet. The sound echoed through the silent ballroom, the sound of judgment hitting the floor. Papers spilled out, sliding across the polished wood of the stage like white leaves. "You are going to need the money in that savings passbook," I said, my voice dropping to a conversational, almost helpful tone. "You are going to need every single cent of it, not for a yacht, not for a campaign." I pointed to the papers scattered at their feet. "You are going to need it to hire criminal defense attorneys, because at 8 o'clock this morning, my lawyer messaged a digital copy of that file to the Internal Revenue Service Fraud Division." The reaction was visceral. My father made a sound like a strangled cat. His knees buckled, and he actually grabbed onto the edge of the stage to keep from collapsing. The color drained from his face so completely that he looked like a wax figure melting under the heat of the lights. "The IRS," he wheezed. The words barely audible. "You didn't." "I did," I replied. "Tax evasion, money laundering through a shell company, unreported rental income. It is all there. Dad." Section 4, Paragraph 2. I believe the potential prison sentence is 5 to 10 years per count. The ballroom exploded. It was chaos. The polite veneer of the Golden Horizon Gala evaporated instantly. The journalists, who had been tipped off by Marcus an hour ago, smelled blood in the water. They rushed forward, ignoring the velvet ropes, their cameras raised like weapons. Flash, flash, flash. The strobe lights of the cameras blinded the Sinclair family. They were trapped in the glare, exposed like rats in a sudden burst of sunlight. Julian was the first to break, my brother, the brave entrepreneur, the man who was supposed to carry the family legacy, looked at the cameras, then at the IRS file on the floor, and panic hijacked his brain. He didn't try to defend our parents. He didn't try to explain. He ran. "I didn't know," he screamed, shoving past our mother. "I just signed the papers. They made me sign them. I am not involved." He scrambled toward the side exit, his Italian leather shoes slipping on the slick surface of the stage. It was a pathetic sight. He looked like a child fleeing a crime scene, but in his haste, he tripped over a cable runner. He went down hard. As he fell, his jacket, the suit I had bought him, flared open. His wallet flew out of his inside pocket, hitting the ground and skidding across the floor. It burst open upon impact. Credit cards scattered across the stage like confetti. Platinum cards, gold cards, black cards. A photographer near the front zoomed in. The image was projected onto the side screens for a split second before the tech crew finally managed to kill the feed. But it was long enough. Everyone saw it. Every single card bore the name. Colette Sinclair. He was carrying my identity in his pocket. He was living on my credit. The physical proof of his parasitism lay scattered around him as he scrambled on his hands and knees, trying to gather them up, looking more guilty than any prosecutor could have hoped for. "Leave them, Julian," I said, my voice amplified over the commotion. "They are canceled anyway." The laughter from the crowd was harsh and unforgiving. The guests were no longer shocked. They were jeering. The elite of Seattle, who prided themselves on propriety, were witnessing the raw, ugly underbelly of the family they had just toasted, and they turned on them with the ferocity of a pack of wolves. "Shame," someone shouted from the back. "Fraud," yelled another. My mother, Sylvia, could not take it anymore. The walls were closing in. Her social standing was incinerated. Her husband was facing prison. Her son was groveling on the floor. Her mask of the benevolent matriarch dissolved, revealing the vicious, cornered animal beneath. She let out a scream that was primal and terrifying. "You ungrateful wretch!" she shrieked, her face contorted into a mask of pure hate. She pointed a shaking finger at me, her eyes bulging. "After everything we did for you, I gave you life. I gave you breath. You are a monster." She stepped over the spilled dossier, ignoring the evidence of her own crimes, and stomped toward the edge of the stage where I stood. She looked ready to physically attack me. Her hands curled into claws. "I am your mother!" she screamed, her voice cracking with hysteria. "I own you. You are nothing without us. You hear me? Nothing. How dare you do this to your own flesh and blood? I birthed you." The crowd went silent again, waiting for my reaction. This was the ultimate trump card of every abusive parent, the biological debt, the claim that giving birth created an eternal servitude. I looked at her. I searched my heart for fear. I searched for that old familiar trembling that used to seize me whenever she raised her voice. I searched for the guilt that had controlled me for a decade. I found nothing. There was only a vast, cool silence inside me. She looked ridiculous to me now. A small, angry woman in a dress she couldn't afford, screaming at a woman she could no longer control. I raised the microphone one last time. I looked her dead in the eye, my expression bored, almost clinical. "You are right, Sylvia," I said. I used her first name. It hit her like a slap. "You gave birth to a daughter." I took a step closer to her, looming over the edge of the stage so that I was looking down at her. "But you didn't want a daughter," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "You wanted an asset. You took a human being and you turned her into a monthly invoice. You turned me into a bill." I let the words hang there. I saw the recognition in her eyes. I saw the fear finally dawn on her as she realized that her old spells no longer worked. "Well," I said, delivering the final line with the cold precision of a judge reading a death sentence, "I have news for you. That bill has expired." I dropped the microphone. It didn't make a loud screech. It hit the wooden floor with a heavy, final thud. The sound signaled the end of the transaction. I didn't wait for a response. There was nothing left to say. The data had been presented. The audit was closed. The account was terminated. I turned my back on them. I turned my back on my father, who was now weeping into his hands. I turned my back on my brother, who was still on his knees gathering useless plastic. I turned my back on my mother, who stood with her mouth open, gasping for air like a fish on a dock. I walked toward the stairs. The flashes of the cameras were blinding, a strobe light storm of white fire, but I didn't blink. I walked through the light, the red dress trailing behind me like the flames of the bridge I had just burned. I was free. The moment the microphone hit the floor, the silence that had held the room captive shattered. It was replaced by a roar of noise that sounded like a dam breaking. The room was no longer a polite gathering of society's elite. It was a riot of judgment. My father, Richard, seemed to physically shrink as the weight of his exposure crushed him. But then, the humiliation ignited a spark of desperate, animalistic rage. His face turned a mottled purple, veins bulging in his neck like cords of rope. He let out a guttural scream, a sound devoid of human reason, and lunged toward the edge of the stage where I was standing. "You bitch!" he roared, spit flying from his mouth. "You ungrateful, treacherous little snake! I will kill you!" He scrambled over the dossier I had thrown, slipping on the papers that detailed his crimes, his hands reaching for my throat. He wanted to hurt me. He wanted to silence the source of his shame. For a split second, I saw the violence in his eyes, the same violence he had used to emotionally batter me for a decade, now manifesting physically, but he never reached me. Two men in dark suits stepped out from the shadows of the wings. They were not hotel staff. They were private security contractors I had hired 3 days ago. I had anticipated this moment. I knew that when a narcissist is cornered, they do not surrender. They attack. The first guard, A man the size of a vending machine stepped in front of me. He didn't even raise his voice. He simply extended one massive arm and caught my father by the chest. It was like watching a child run into a brick wall. Richard gasped as the air was knocked out of him. His momentum halted instantly. "Step back, sir," the guard said. His voice was calm, bored even. "Do not advance." "Get off me!" Richard shrieked, flailing his arms impotently against the guard's suit. "That is my daughter. I have a right to discipline her. She ruined everything." "Sir, if you attempt to touch Ms. Sinclair again, you will be restrained," the guard stated, shoving Richard back toward the center of the stage. My father stumbled, nearly tripping over Julian, who was still on his knees trying to collect the credit cards. I didn't flinch. I stood behind my wall of paid protection. Watching my father unravel, he looked pathetic. The man I had once feared. The man whose approval I had spent $384,000 trying to buy was nothing more than a tantrum-throwing toddler in a tuxedo. In the ballroom, the exodus had begun. It was a slow, deliberate evacuation. The guests were not running. They were distancing themselves. It was a social quarantine. I saw the deputy mayor leaning over to his aide, whispering furiously while pointing at the stage with a look of utter disgust. I saw the bishop shaking his head, turning his back on my mother, who was trying to catch his eye. "Let's go," I heard a woman say at the table nearest to the stage. "I feel dirty just being here." "Can you believe it?" her husband replied, loud enough for my parents to hear. "They tried to get us to donate to a scholarship fund that doesn't exist. They are common grifters." "Grifters," another voice echoed. "Thieves." My mother, Sylvia, stood in the center of the stage, her chest heaving. She looked out at the sea of retreating backs. These were the people she had spent years trying to impress. These were the people whose validation she craved more than oxygen, and now, they were looking at her as if she were a disease. "Wait," Sylvia screamed, her voice cracking. "Please, don't go. There is an explanation. We can explain. It is a mistake." She ran toward the edge of the stage, extending her hands toward the retreating donors. "Mrs. Vanderbilt, please, we are still the Sinclairs. We are still us." Mrs. Vanderbilt paused, turned, and looked at Sylvia with eyes cold as ice. "Yes, Sylvia, we know exactly who you are now, and frankly, you are repulsive." Sylvia recoiled as if she had been slapped. She staggered back, clutching her chest. Then, the double doors at the back of the ballroom burst open. It wasn't guests leaving, it was the law arriving. 4 agents wearing navy blue windbreakers with yellow lettering marched into the room. The lettering on their backs was clear. IRS, Criminal Investigation. Behind them were 2 uniformed Seattle police officers. The guests parted for them like the Red Sea. A hush fell over the room, different from the silence of my speech. This was the silence of doom. I looked at my watch. 8:45. Elena, my lawyer, was efficient. She must have flagged the case as a high-priority flight risk given the yacht purchase. "Richard Sinclair? Sylvia Sinclair? Julian Sinclair?" the lead agent announced, his voice booming without a microphone. My father froze. He stopped shouting at the security guard. He looked at the agents, and the fight went out of him instantly. He slumped, his shoulders collapsing. But my mother did not slump. She snapped. Realizing that the social game was lost and the legal hammer was falling, she turned on the only targets left available to her, her family. She spun around and screamed at Richard. "This is your fault!" she screeched, pointing a manicured finger at his face. I told you the tax evasion was too risky. I told you we should have declared the rental income. But no, you had to have the boat. You had to have the vintage wines." Richard, stung and terrified, roared back. "My fault? My fault? You are the one who needed the Maldives trip. You are the one who demanded the diamond choker. You spent $50,000 on cosmetic surgery last year and made me hide it in the company accounts. You are a weak, useless man." Sylvia spat. Her face twisted into a mask of pure hatred. I should have married the lawyer like my mother told me. You have dragged me into the gutter. And you. Richard turned on Julian, who was trying to crawl away toward the back curtain. Get back here, you coward. This is your company. You are the managing director. You signed the papers. Julian stood up, tears streaming down his face, snot running from his nose. I didn't know what I was signing. You told me it was just for tax benefits. You used me. You both used me. Used you? Sylvia laughed. A hysterical, jagged sound. We fed you. We clothed you. You are 30 years old and you have never worked a day in your life. We bought you that apartment. We bought you that car. And you were too stupid to even hide the paper trail. I hate you, Julian screamed, stomping his foot. I hate you both. I am going to tell the police everything. I am going to testify against you. I am not going to jail for your greed. You ungrateful little parasite. Richard lunged at his son. They began to shove each other. My father, my mother, and my brother, the legacy of love, were now physically fighting on stage in front of 500 witnesses and federal agents. They were tearing at each other's clothes, screaming accusations, blaming everyone but themselves. It was a scene of absolute moral decay. It was grotesque. It was the truest thing they had ever done. I watched them for 1 second longer. I engraved the image into my mind. The three of them, a knot of hatred and selfishness, devouring each other as their world burned. I felt nothing, no pity, no anger, no sadness. I placed the microphone stand back in its upright position. I didn't need to say anything else. The show was over. I turned away from the stage. I walked down the stairs, my heels clicking softly on the carpeted steps. The security guard nodded at me as I passed. Good luck, Ms. Sinclair. Thank you, I said. Make sure they don't hurt each other too badly before the handcuffs go on. I began to walk toward the exit. The crowd, which had been paralyzed by the spectacle on stage, noticed my movement as I walked down the center aisle. The guests stepped back. They didn't just move out of the way. They created a wide berth, looking at me with a mixture of fear and awe. I wasn't the mousy daughter anymore. I wasn't the victim. I was the woman who had brought down the temple. I walked with my head high, the red dress flowing around me like armor. I didn't look at them. I didn't care about their whispers. Their approval meant nothing to me. I had bought my freedom, and the receipt was on the floor of the stage behind me. I pushed open the heavy double doors of the ballroom and stepped out into the lobby. The noise of the screaming match faded instantly, muffled by the soundproofing. The lobby was quiet. The concierge desk was empty. I walked to the main entrance. The automatic glass doors slid open, and the night air hit me. It was cold. It was the kind of damp, chilling cold that usually seeps into your bones in Seattle, but tonight, it felt electric. It felt sharp and clean. I inhaled deeply, filling my lungs with oxygen that didn't smell of lies and stale perfume. A black sports car was idling at the curb. The window rolled down. Marcus was behind the wheel. He looked at me, his eyes scanning my face for signs of damage. Then, he grinned. That, he said, was nuclear. Did you hear it? I asked, opening the passenger door. Hear it? Marcus laughed. I was monitoring the audio feed. I think you blew out the subwoofers when you dropped the mic. The police scanners are going crazy. They are talking about a domestic disturbance involving federal crimes at the Hyatt. Sounds accurate, I said, sliding into the leather seat. It was warm inside the car. Did they? Marcus started to ask, but stopped. They are eating each other alive, I said. I left them fighting over who is going to prison for longer. Marcus nodded. Asset forfeiture will kick in by tomorrow morning. The house, the boat, the accounts, it is all going to be seized. They are going to be penniless. Colette. They have been penniless for years, I said, buckling my seatbelt. They just used my money to hide it. Now, they just have to live in reality. Marcus shifted the car into gear. The engine purred. a low, powerful growl. Suddenly, my purse vibrated. Then it vibrated again, and again. It was a continuous, frantic buzzing. I reached into the clutch and pulled out my phone. The screen was lighting up with notifications. Incoming call. Mom, incoming call. Dad. Text from Julian. Please help me. They are arresting me. Text from Mom. Colette, answer the phone. Tell them it was a joke. Voice missed call. Dad. They were reaching out, even now. As the handcuffs were clicking shut, they were reaching out, not to apologize, but to use me one last time. They wanted me to fix it. They wanted the ATM to dispense a miracle. I looked at the names on the screen. For 10 years, these names had triggered a Pavlovian response of anxiety and obedience in me. When Mom flashed on the screen, my heart rate would spike. When Dad called, I would reach for my wallet. Now, I just looked at the pixels. Pull over for a second, I said to Marcus. He braked gently near a street lamp. I rolled down the window. The city smelled of rain and pine. I took the phone in my hands. I dug my fingernail into the side slot and popped the SIM card tray open. The tiny chip, the connection to my old life, fell into my palm. I didn't just drop it. I took it between my thumb and forefinger and snapped it in half. It broke with a satisfying crackle. I leaned out the window and tossed the pieces into a metal trash can sitting on the curb. Then, I tossed the phone in after it. You need a new phone, Marcus noted. I need a new number, I corrected. And a new zip code. Drive. Where to? Marcus asked, pulling back onto the road. The airport, I said. I have a flight to Tokyo in 3 hours. I have always wanted to see the cherry blossoms. And I hear they don't accept payment in gilt there. Marcus smiled and hit the gas. The car surged forward, merging onto the highway. I didn't look back at the hotel. I didn't look back at the skyline of the city where I had been a prisoner of my own biology. I watched the road ahead, illuminated by the headlights, stretching out into the darkness. The rain began to fall again, streaking the windshield. But inside the car, it was dry, it was quiet, and for the first time in 32 years, it was mine. My parents had made me pay $384,000 for a family that didn't exist. It was a steep price, but as the city lights faded in the rearview mirror, I realized something. I had bought the most expensive thing in the world. I had bought my freedom, and honestly, it was a bargain. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please leave a comment below sharing your location and your thoughts on my revenge. If you enjoyed this journey, please subscribe to the channel BitterSweet Drama Stories, like the video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach more people who need to hear that it is okay to walk away.